Hi, my name is Jason Stinson, and my speech is entitled The Porojmos. First of all, imagine you're a small child and you're walking through a forest and it's freezing and you're uncertain of your future and you're uncertain now of your past. You've left your home uncertain in the middle of the night, but this is not something completely unfamiliar to you. The only thing that is familiar to you is that it's always got a negative consequence and connotation behind it. Imagine being sat on a tree stump with a line of your parents and cousins and grandparents and uncles and aunts and everybody you've ever known and loved beside you as you're being tested and your skills in speaking Serbian as you're crossing through Yugoslavia to get to the Americas or to a freer country. This was the case for many people. These people have These people have for centuries been forgotten. These people have for centuries been buried in mass graves that we're still digging up to this day. And yes, I'm referring to the people called the Gypsies, or as they are better known as the Polska Roma, specifically who I'll be talking about today. There are also many others, the Calderesh, the Sinti, the Lora. There are many different kinds. So it's very hard to discern. We travel and we travel all over, and we're all over the place. So this is something known as a dispersed nation. So the Roma people, whose highest population is in Romania, a common misconception, they're a dispersed nation. So even though these people identify as one nationalistic point of view, they do not have a nation to call home, because everywhere they ever go gets burned down. But we'll get to that. First of all, I urge each and every one of you to learn about the Roma genocide and to support their stand in being recognized by celebrating August 2nd as the national holiday in remembrance of the Roma who were slaughtered. That's very important. I'm sorry, that's very important to me and that's very close to my heart. These people who have had to hide who they are and stay in the shadows of other cultures for as long as they can remember. And even as far as today, they are still being slaughtered in many countries for who they are. This needs to end, and they need to be remembered. Fun fact, if you don't know this, even on the United Nations Board of Representatives, there is a spot for the Roma people or Romani people. Not one of those people are of Roma or Romani descent. Fun fact. The Romani people being remembered is near and dear to me. When I was a child growing up, I was always told my cousins died in the forest back in Poland, and we followed very strict superstitions and traditions, but I never knew why. It's kind of why I laugh at that. I never really knew that people didn't have babushkas, but you didn't get to tell people that. I didn't really know that, certain things were to be cooked outside, and, you just follow certain specific strange traditions. If something's broken, you close the room forever. That's a very strange tradition that I guess you don't question until you're older. But on my grandmother's side, I just knew we moved to America, we joined a church. That church made my grandfather change our last name because my grandmother was a widower, my babushka. So in order for her to get a job at the Cracker Jack factory in Chicago, my grandfather had to become a choir boy, and it was a whole thing. And they allowed us to change our name to St. James. It was formerly Swominski. The L had a diacritic, which means a little cross through it, and it was just so complicated that nobody could get a hold of it, and they changed it to James. Yeah. I don't know. I don't work at what I assume was the modern day equivalent of the DMV. Okay. Sorry, getting off subject here. Still to this day, no one in my family will speak on it. That's true. So my grandfather, I spoke before about him being a detective. He was always with the Polk County Sheriff's Department. He spent a long time with them. He was the head of vice, homicide units, like a lot of really, stuff you're not allowed to talk about. So he didn't speak for like 20 years until he was debriefed. And even then, it wasn't like anything cool. It was just like random cuss words. So I'm going to be honest with you. We didn't get hardly anything out of him. certainly there's some sort of anger or resentment behind him to his family to not want to hash any of that out, because we have, I mean, probably 10 generations of pearls and jewels and mink and all kinds of things, valuables buried somewhere in history. Okay. So I will say the Roma people were a huge part of the Holocaust, and that's one of the first things he taught me, and that's probably one of the biggest sentences he's ever said to me. They're still being genocided today, and they have nowhere to call home. Now, that really doesn't even touch on the fact that the horror stories that these people were put through, that these, people of Romani descent who merged from one area of the continent to another, who had one type of eye color and one, different type of eye color, were sent to a laboratory, had their eyes plucked out of them, and were sent to a horrible, horrible Nazi man to do experiments upon. Okay, you're probably thinking there isn't a possible way that a whole society of people who were left out of the history books, but research has shown that Auschwitz was the biggest camp known for killing Romani people, according to an article posted in 2022 on Auschwitz.org, as immediately upon arrival in gas chambers by Dr. Josef Mengele, terrible, terrible person. Mengele, or Mengele, was the lead scientist in charge of the Roma people. He dissected their twins. He collected the eyes of the Roma, who had a condition known as heterochromia iris, which someone has two different colored eyes, which is something I touched on a second ago. He had them shipped out to be studied. If that isn't bad enough to make your skin crawl and understand why these people need to be remembered, maybe this will help persuade you. How many of you are women? How many of you want children and want to be mothers? Well, imagine you're trapped in a camp with a mad scientist who believes he has the right to choose whether or not you will ever have that chance. That's right. Mengele sterilized hundreds and thousands of women. In return, he would release them back into society, though they would be shunned from their caravans and never allowed into Romani society again. It was a terrible thing to bear. You were an outcast, and usually these people died born alone. Very sad way of being ostracized by their own society. And this was done purposefully. According to an article published by Time magazine on November 30th, 2019, hundreds and thousands of Roma were slaughtered in the Holocaust. We later learned that the number, at the very least, is 500,000 Romani slaughtered. It wasn't until August 2nd, 2018, when a few younger Romani people wanted to be recognized for their part in survival of the Holocaust. The Sinti Roma Holocaust Memorial Trust was set up as a plea for people to recognize them and know what really happened. If you thought the Holocaust was the end of their torture, think again, because as of 2023, the Roman people are still persecuted for their culture, and they stay to themselves. Being recognized and spotted throughout history has gotten them murdered. This is mainly because its world has decided to forget them instead of embrace their differences. Do you want to continue being a part of the problem, or would you like to help and shed light on what's happening to these people, our people, again? And I say our people because we're all made up of each other. I urge you, at the very least, to take a look into the lives these people have been forced to live, mostly in secrecy, in order to maybe sway your opinion a bit on how you feel about these people and, how you bring them up in conversation from now on, because right now they are not. In order to survive, these people have been forced to steal, have their own secret language, which is usually a combination of many different languages, to only speak Roma within their caravan groups. And this is a thing too. Once they have split caravan groups, they can only speak Roma. The Roma language kind of digresses from there. And now you have caravans that can no longer speak to each other. So even Roma people cannot speak to other Roma people. This is a big issue. And this is forced upon us. Romani people have just as much right to show their beliefs and traditions as much as any other culture. But even in America today, they are not treated as equals. They are still forced into lives of crime and hiding. I say forced into because many places will not hire them. Many places will not take them in. Many places still discriminate against them. This is very true. Among many other people. These aren't the only minorities that are persecuted against. There are many others. And this is an issue in America. They are still forced into lives of crime. Many of them deemed frauds for fortune telling. And don't get that confused. Fortune telling is often confused with future telling. These things are not coherent. These are not the same words. Even though fortune telling has always been a huge part of their own beliefs and traditions, it is a form of healing. It is a form of prayer and meditation. Fortune does not mean future. They do not tell you what is going to happen, and unfortunately people forget that, so they ostracize them. And in some cases, very rich, powerful people are told things they don't want to hear, and they burn them at stake. How would you feel at this day and age people were still being persecuted for their own lifestyles? Even this simply. Every day we see movements rise to shed light on the truth in different parts of us. So why not the Roma people? It's been long enough. I, for one, think they have suffered for far too long. Let's make a stand. Let's celebrate August 2nd and remember those who were forgotten. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, at least they must be somewhere they can feel safe. At least they must have at some point been led on this trail of tears to somewhere but a mass grave. You know, there must be some plot of land for them. But there is not. They mostly exist in encampments and apartment complexes in terrible places. Unfortunately, Roma travelers, still known as travelers because we have nowhere to call home. They have nowhere to call home. Unfortunately, Romani travelers have nowhere they can feel safe. They've been dispersed as a nation for as long as history can trace. The Romani people have been chased out of every home they've ever tried to make. It is though their beginning started in Indo-Aryan territory, but not much is really set in stone due to the tradition of not keeping any documentation to prevent capture and persecution. This is something we saw in World War II when they hunted the Jews. They used their documentation against them. Differing from common conception, the Romani people are not from Romania, and they're actually completely different and separate. The names being so close together is just a coincidence. However, some Roma people found solace in the similarities and have hidden themselves within the borders of Romania. However, most Romani, move from country to country hiding within cultures until they are again found and forced to flee. They have almost never had a peace except for the kingdom of Bohemia. When the king's reign was over, the Romani were forced to flee to safety again in surrounding countries. With such a rich history covered in blood and torture, don't you think it's time that we recognize them instead of acting like they never existed? Instead of acting like Bohemian is a style and that Gypsy is some sort of slang term for hippie or fairy or God, I can't imagine what else. Okay, sorry, get a little heated over that one. So to conclude, let's all take a moment of silence for the Roma suffering today and the ones who have been slaughtered for centuries. It is time we recognize this hidden, dispersed nation. They have been holocausted, their pain and suffering has never ended. And to make it even worse, they do not have a right or a law because they have not even a piece of land to call their own. We cannot do something to help, even if it's just spreading the word that the Roma travelers exist. They deserve to be heard. So let's take action. This August 2nd, close your eyes and picture yourself not having a home, having to hide your culture, your beliefs, having to look at your neighbor and ask them if they've heard about the Romani people. I urge you to follow all the Daikel Collective to keep in the loop of activists bringing movements from the darkness to the light. History is all most of us have. Can you imagine not being able to know about your great-great-grandmother, or where you came from, or your grandmother, or your mother, or where any of you came from? Better yet, having to present that you are someone you are not, just to be able to survive. Having to adopt a fake name, just to be able to exist in a country. Let's take a stand. Gloria to Roma, we will always remember.